Welcome back, everybody. I have a background. Ben does not yet. We're working on it. Week by week, you'll see us improving.
We're halfway there.
So I did get to read a little bit this week.
Cool.
That we're back to normal after our move. I read some of the Psychology of Money, which is got some interesting pieces. I'll dig out the ones that were related to that. The one that I just read was about, it just had this one anecdote that made me think. You know Jack Welch, who was the CEO of General Electric for a long time? Mm-hmm. When we were growing up, General Electric was like just the standard awesome company that just did solidly always and forever. And Jack Welch was like, he was actually the CEO whose name you knew if you knew anything about business back in the day. Yeah. I don't think I could have named, like there were no superstar Elon Musks at the time, but there was a Jack Welch who was just like, yes, this guy is the business guy.
Yeah. 25 years ago, he was the Elon Musk-esque person.
Yes. Elon is in a different league today. Like he's a celebrity in terms of CEO status. But I thought this was interesting. GE has sucked for the last while. And one of the stories that this book insinuates caused it is that when Jack Welch was CEO, he would get departments to play accounting games in order to beat Wall Street earnings. And he was committed to always beating whatever the Wall Street earnings said that he could have. And he would have... They said it was nothing illegal, and again, this is sort of coming from this book and a little bit of Google research, but people have commented on it since. It was nothing illegal, but definitely not up to GAAP standards, which wasn't around at the time, which is an accounting principle standard. And people would make up shortfalls for other departments, and they'd borrow against the future in order to get revenue and always beat earnings. And it just made me think, like, was this guy great, or was he great at kicking the explosive downfall of GE 20 years down the line, or 10 years down the line to the next guy? And obviously there's a ton more stuff happening in terms of the lack of innovation. Like GE used to have all the cool stuff, and now maybe Mike Blender is GE, but probably not at this point. I just thought it was interesting how I literally was not into business, knew this guy's name, read about him, knew what an amazing CEO and how he did things, and he wrote a book that everybody followed. And he might have set a time bomb that just exploded after he got out of there.
Yeah, maybe.
Which is incredible. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but
no, I mean, that's not surprising. I think a lot people often do what they're incentivized to do. Mm-hmm. So if Jack Welch felt that his incentives were to make the best products, he would behave one way. But if he felt that his incentives were to beat Wall Street earnings, I think that probably happens a lot to this day in a lot of companies.
Yeah, it's people win the game that they're paid to win. And the game was not make GE successful after I leave. The game was beat earnings, keep my job, make a lot of money, sell a lot of books, saying how great a CEO I am. And most of those sales are going to come in the first, period after it comes out. Yeah, I don't know how to get people to play longer-term games. We've talked about this. The only thing that seems to be able to make people play long-term games against their financial interests is ideology, including religion. So yeah, there's a value to some of that stuff. Another thing that came up, which made me think, this was semi-related to the money. This was from Alex Hormozy, actually. I was rereading his $100 million offer book. And he says something that Naval Ravikant says, which is that desire is a contract not to be happy until we get what we want. But also that the role of a business is to make people desire a thing and exchange money. And if you just substitute that, you get the role of a business is to make people not happy until they get what they want in exchange for money. And I think that there are industries that's not necessarily true. Like you need to eat, you don't need to be marketed, but pretty much, and I was thinking about this, I'm curious what you think. There is a degree of truth to that, which is that so much of business success is in convincing people that they are not happy enough and that they would be happy if they completed some sort of purchase.
Just look at the latest version of marketing, which is social media marketing, is people photoshopping their lives to an unattainable, literally they don't even look like this, and they're renting out props that look like private jets but aren't private jets. Also, they can say, I live this life, your life is worse than this. Do you want my fit tee? Do you want my business coaching? Do you want my whatever it is? And they're just trying to make you feel inadequate by showing you their life that isn't real.
Yeah.
So that's just, and it's marketing 101 is stoke the pain, stoke someone's inadequacy, stoke someone's feeling that they aren't enough until they buy your thing.
I guess what's crazy is that the reward for winning that game, where you know, let's assume that you're selling something that doesn't make people happy or contribute to their continued survival, like food or shelter. The reward for that game is more money, which then doesn't make you happy. You know what I mean?
We've talked about this before. Like people, first of all, I just want to say being poor is very hard, and not everybody has a good stock in life. But people today that think that they have a bad hand have access to food in a way that only kings had previously. And their iPhone and their Netflix on their laptop gives them more entertainment than a pharaoh with 100 court jesters. But they feel like shit because they don't have enough compared to what they look at around them. Like all of consumerism is comparative, because if you just took someone, plopped them back in time, but gave them their iPhone and they had the ability to get food in the same way, but no one else could see the stores, they'd be the best off person and they'd be very happy because of it. Like their happiness comes from the comparison, or their lack of happiness.
I felt that in Costa Rica when I lived there, which was, and even, you know, a couple friends, these were when iPhones were out, like a few friends had flip phones, and like that was awesome because you could like use that to coordinate with people. Otherwise, we used to have to collect calls and scream where you were in the exact moment. So, you know, you call ATT and they'd be like, I'm right in front of the school, meet me in 5 minutes. When you say your name is. But I was happy there. So many of the people that I encountered were happy there. They did the World Happiness Survey. I think they ranked number 3 on the list.
Yeah, at one point I think they were number 1.
Yeah, and I think Vanuatu beat them. That was like a point of Vanuatu.
We could be happier. Yeah, and mostly, if I remember correctly, you were eating rice and beans. Your shower barely worked. You had
no, like didn't have hot water. Didn't eat meat more than a handful of times a week.
But no one around you did, and no one expected you to.
Yes,
which made it easier to be happy.
Yes. And there were things that, you know, you could change and make and around the edges to contribute to happiness. But yeah, then I've come back to America and have a ridiculous amount more than that. But I guess I don't know that I'm any happier than I was then, which is fucking insane. I was talking about I had a conversation with Ali about the Part-Time YouTuber Academy. We're launching this course teaching people how to do YouTube. And one of the questions was, how do I not feel bad when a video duds? I've said this before, but I was like, just so you know, YouTube analytics is not your friend. Like, YouTube analytics is there to make you feel miserable with their little up arrow if you have a 1 out of 10 and a down arrow if you have a 10 out of 10. Like, that's a completely relative measure, divorced from what you actually want and need and would make you happy in life. And nowhere in YouTube analytics does it say, like, 1 out of 10, you enjoyed this video. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
fun to make.
1 out of 10... like you learned a lot. Like 1 out of 10, you spent time with the family this week. Like the only thing is, like, did it get more views than the recent videos?
Well, I don't know if it's YouTubers informing the software, but I actually bet it's the software informing YouTubers.
Oh,
Most
totally.
The YouTubers that you talk to don't talk about their lifestyle, and they don't talk about the amount of money they make. They talk about growing views and growing subscribers, which is exactly what you see every day on the dashboard. Almost to an illogical degree, because you would think someone would be going, how, like, am I helping people? Is my life good? Am I happy? Am I making money? And that rarely comes up at YouTuber conferences when you're talking to people. Now, maybe they just think they're trying to speak your language when they talk subs and views, but probably there's a bit of training, because that's what gets measured gets managed.
Well, this was the thing that I crystallized is, if you are in a growth goal oriented part of your life, which is totally fine, I think you need to build your own dashboard. And like that can look like the whiteboard that we had in Brazil.
I was just thinking that.
It had 4 things and then all of our names on it in a little grid fashion. What was it? Social, work, like gym,
fitness, and sunshine, I think.
Fitness and like fun. Yeah. And like they were all weighted equally. And so if
you didn't work, but you got sunshine, talked to someone you're attracted to, did some sort of fun sport thing with your friend.
That was like 75% days were awesome.
Yep.
You know,
dude, that's great. Well done.
And so we were filling in our little dashboards.
And then if work was a 0 3 days in a row, you're like, oh, all right. Because it does also show you where you're on a hot streak.
Yes.
Like, I'm on a sun hot streak, but not on a work hot streak.
Yes. And I don't remember exactly, but there were only 4 dimensions.
No one made any money, and everyone was extremely happy.
And one of them was work. But we did, I actually think, build the foundation for what I know we did.
Well, yeah, obviously. Obviously, we built the foundation.
We did build the foundations for it. It gave us a longer runway. It made us make decisions that were long-term oriented, because we weren't so stressed about making money. And just, yeah, that idea that if you are going to pursue a goal and you're not in that like Eastern philosophy, just be stage of life where you're not measuring anything, you have to build your own dashboard. And it can look like a whiteboard or a spreadsheet, and it needs to include the things that you sit down philosophically and determine actually matter and are important in your life. And so like probably time with people I love should be on there.
Yeah,
and
health.
like, did I enjoy the process of whatever it is that earned me money should be on there. Because yeah, man, that'll scream at you sometime. Like you'll have a streak, I imagine, where you're like crushing it with money and then everything else looks like crap.
Yeah.
And you'll probably make a different decision than if you're just looking at the YouTube dashboard and you're like, views.
Sure, or you'll have a week like I had where I had 2 videos that smashed in a row, and then Timothy Chalamet comes in, doesn't do well. And it's like, I'm not any worse off for this. Nothing that I was going to do, now I can't do because I was really counting on that Timothy Chalamet money. But every time I open the app, it just haunts me.
You know what's funny is that when you have a bad video, that's actually an investment in your future happiness on YouTube. Because it's because it's not even absolute. It's not like, hey, here's where you said your goal was. Were you above or below it?
No, it just tells you how you're doing in the last 10.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, it just ranks the most recent 10 videos you did. And so like we had a streak where we had a bunch of like 6s, 7s, and 8s. And then we got a 1, which was beneath what a 4 would have been 6 months earlier. It was like, number 1.
Number 1, baby. It's also funny because it's beating several videos, but I just expected them not to do well. Life's all about expectations. When I did Ted Lasso, I said, this isn't going to do well.
Yeah.
But I just like him. And I think leadership is a topic we don't do often. And it was great. And it did terribly views-wise. And I went, that's great. And Timothy Chalamet's beating that video, but I feel worse about it.
Get out of YouTube Studio, man. It's a useful tool to pop into from time to time. And actually, what's funny is if you enter into any sort of metric, this is something from a different business book, but it stuck with me, is like there's an optimal time to check certain metrics. So if you weigh yourself every hour, that's not going to help you achieve your fitness goals.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you need to weigh yourself probably every either couple of days or week or whatever in order to like stay motivated and actually be getting useful feedback. Popping in there all the time to see like, how's it doing this half hour? How's it doing this half hour? You're just seeing the most recent comment, which doesn't contribute to you actually understanding the long-term health of the channel at all. And you get, that's of course the same thing with news, which is like, if you're checking the news every day on the news cycle, you're actually very uninformed as to what matters in the world.
It's actually interesting. I was thinking about this because I was looking at some news stuff just to figure out what we were going to talk about today. And I feel like the news buckets into different camps. There's some news stories that might tell you what's happening in the world, but there's other news stories that I would call anecdotal that just tell you about one thing that happened in one town that if you read about them or watch them can convince you that that's something that's happening frequently, but it's absolutely not. It's just an anecdote that the news happened to pick up because it's salacious and it doesn't
Isn't every
inform you
news
at all.
story about one thing that happens, though? You know what I mean? Like, isn't September 11th just one thing that happened somewhere in the world?
Well, this is going to be a spicy take, but I actually think that it's a little bit weird how much emphasis we put on 9/11 and then not on the war that subsequently lost so many more U.S. lives and civilian lives. And also, I was reading international news around that time, and people were saying, it's a tragedy, but also weird that America acts like this doesn't happen in other countries all the time. So, yeah, 9/11 is an isolated incident.
That's kind of what I'm saying. Is that every news report is a thing that happened somewhere. It's not like an
I would
aggregate
argue
of a
actually, like, if you're keeping up to date on COVID research and like COVID vaccine research as new information comes out for Pfizer and Moderna, that's more actionable and tells you about the state of scientific rigor that's being done on the vaccine. Like that feels more useful and more representative of potentially
So the news
reality.
So what you're saying is the news can report on events that happen, in which case that's a thing, or it can report on aggregates of data and share with you.
Sure, and I guess everything's a thing. So let me try to say this again. Who won the U.S. presidency is not an anecdote. Like that's a major event that will affect the next 4 years. And so when the news reports on who won the presidency, that to me feels like real news versus a shark attack in North Carolina, which is just salacious, but actually if you could report on every shark attack that there was and think there was a major shark attack problem, but there's not. You're just missing out on all the stuff not being covered.
Got it. So I understand what you're saying. I think it's that everything is an event that occurs, and we can use the term anecdote to talk about it. And even the presidency is like, that's a thing that happens somewhere in the world. And what you're saying is some of it matters and some of it doesn't, and is intended to give you a broad, it's intended, the shark attack thing, like the presidential story, makes you think this matters and is indicative of large scale changes to come and things you need to concern yourself with for the future in order to make intelligent decisions.
I think can convince you of things that aren't. It can change how we talked about this before. It just warps your view of reality.
Yeah.
And I think to a degree that distances itself from true reality, if that is such a thing.
Well, I would even, and I think you probably would agree that to a large degree for many people, and this is not universally true, but neither is this true of shark attacks, somebody will get attacked, who the U.S. president is, for many people, if you didn't tell them, they wouldn't know. You know what I mean? Like if every news thing was bleeped, censored, concerned, like they might guess.
Until they make abortion illegal.
Yeah.
You go to get an abortion.
Hasn't happened federally. You know what I mean? That hasn't happened. All right. Like maybe your tax is going to jump 3 points and you could be like, it was a Democrat. I knew it. But it is widely, and that's not to say that, these things can't have compounding effects that matter in the long term. But I do think that people are
The problem with presidency is every once in a while it will matter. Like if Al Gore had won, maybe we wouldn't have gone to war in Iraq.
And so maybe $2 trillion could have been saved. Yeah.
So I think it's like you can't, some presidents are like other presidents and it doesn't matter. And then you're like, okay, sometimes the face of the world has changed forever because of who won a presidency. So.
Yeah. Which is also scary because it's like neither of them campaigned on not entering into the war if we were attacked. Yeah. Nobody advertised that or knew that was coming.
Well, who knew that he was still upset about his dad going to war, Yeah. Who could have thought?
Yeah. He went to finish the job. But random psychology of money thing. I mentioned this to you, actually. We don't necessarily need to go into it. But this did stick with me, and I've seen it in my own life, that everybody has different money beliefs, and I see this in business, and certain ones have helped other people. Some people are more fearful, and some people are more tight. Some people believe things will always work out. And obviously, a lot of that is due to early childhood experiences. Mm-hmm. But the early childhood experiences are very, very determined by the generation you were born in. So my dad and I, for years, have disagreed about money. But if you just blanked out our faces and names, you could absolutely guess who was born in the late 50s and who was born in the late 80s. It's just so obvious. He's like, you got to invest in the stock market. You got to do this. They wanted me to be a doctor when I was growing up. Just all of the things from their generation that made sense.
Well, yeah, you couldn't have a Charisma on Command without the internet.
Exactly.
So it's a terrible call to quit your job and move to Brazil to start a business if there's no internet.
I was going to play video games professionally. And I was like, who's going to do, nobody's going to pay you to do that. You got to go out. And not that he was, not that I foresaw the advent of Twitch and YouTube.
Yeah.
But
the good news is you would never have been good enough to be a professional video game player anyway. I do feel, actually, this is something I'm noticing. There's so many people who want to be the next ninja for streaming, or they want to be the next Mr. Beast, or they want to be the next whatever. And because there's not an obvious physical difference, like with Shaquille O'Neal, they think, I could have if I had just. And Mr. Beast is just as different from the average person as Shaquille O'Neal. You know what I mean? And the professional video game players, they're not just guys who were good at it when they were 6. People are going, oh my God, I was so good at Halo when I was a kid. I just should have stuck with it. It's like, no, you were never, ever, ever going to beat these people who train like it's a sport, unless you were going to train 12 hours a day like it's a sport. Right. And I think it involves other things. Like it involves hand-eye coordination, or it involves fast twitch thumb muscles in a way that people aren't measuring because it's not as visible as
nobody knows what it is. Because what you're saying is that Mr. Beast has innate qualities that predispose him to succeed in this particular field. And with Shaq, it's like, I can see that quality. It's called being 7'3", and I know that I don't have it. I don't even think we actually know the quality that Mr. Beast has. That
for video games, though, there is a reaction time thing, and there is a spatial relations thing, and a peripheral vision thing. And I don't think that anyone can just decide to be the world's best Fortnite player. But I think the illusion is that anyone can be that person. And so then you basically have a bunch of people that think that they can be the next ninja or the next Mr. Beast just if they had only tried a little bit harder, not realizing that it's as likely as being the next LeBron.
But you can spot that you're not very early. You can tell that you're not the next LeBron. And with Fortnite, you're like, if I just started a little bit earlier, or just, played a little bit harder. Another thing that we've talked about in the past is that this just mentions an anecdote of John Bogle, who was the Vanguard guy. He's I think it's Vanguard, right? And his whole thing is like diversify ETFs, all that kind of stuff, and he's been on that. But apparently, again, according to the psychology of money, he got wealthy off of over indexing into one stock early in his life, which was Geico.
Nice.
And we've talked about this. Like Tony Robbins' book on money is 700 pages. Doesn't talk about entrepreneurship, which is mind-boggling because it's like, Tony, you didn't get rich off compound interest. Stop it. You got rich.
Well, to be fair, what your advice is in investing, Warren Buffett says this. People are like, what should I invest in? He goes, well, you can either dedicate your entire life to picking the right stocks, or you can put it in the S&P 500.
Yes.
So I think potentially Bogle's advice is, unless you're going to suss out the next Geico through 3 months of research and reading cash flow statements and doing discounted cash flow models, just diversify and then get back to living your life.
Well, I believe he had a quote that even acknowledged, like, he's like, I was lucky, like that big. And and basically what I think is true after reading several of these things and thinking about the math of it is that there are two phases. If you're money interested oriented, there's two phases. There's the acquiring that first sum, and then there's the growing it and expanding it. And a lot of the people that have a lot often talk about what they're doing now, which is like diversifying and putting it in all these different places and enjoying their living off the principal. And it's like, yeah, that only works because you were an entrepreneur, got incredibly lucky or something else. And you're writing to a bunch of people who haven't got that first big chunk, and retiring with $3 million in the bank when you're 65 years old after a ton of inflation isn't that, awesome of a thing to advise. And I just feel like a lot of the money advice has missed the mark. And this kind of
I have good news for you. A lot of the money advice today is not that at all. So if your concern is that a lot of the money advice people are getting is to diversify into ETFs,
That's fair.
Sleep easy, my man.
That was my money
Sleep
advice.
Easy.
Yes.
It's NFTs. That's the advice everyone's getting on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram. So you're good.
Yes, fair enough. So that was some of my thoughts on psychology of money. I don't know if I'm going to continue.
I'm surprised. I thought it was about your own money beliefs. It sounds like it's much more anecdotal about history.
It's about people's money beliefs. It's about the things that people do. And I prefer the books that are a bit more philosophical about it, a bit more woo-woo. I like The Soul of Money, which is like, look, let the money flow. Given it shall come back. I have no science to prove this, but like, here's 3 anecdotes. And I like that. You know what I mean? That's I prefer that too.
That's why they cover shark attacks in the news.
Yes. And I prefer to live that way. So actually I wanted to get a few more anecdotes for the cast. I'm like, I don't actually want this type of thing. Not that it's a horrible book or anything, but it was, the implicit goal is that you need to grow and accrue wealth. And I'm like, I just obviously don't 100% agree with that. I'm interested. The psychology of money is fascinating to me, but probably not going to complete it. So a couple other things. I watched the Dave Chappelle special. Did you watch it? You watched?
Nope.
You didn't finish it?
Nope.
We only watched a piece of it.
Watched the first 20 minutes and then I lost interest.
Yeah. So there's the part that I thought was interesting is that, so he does the special and predictably people like it. Critics often don't. Rotten Tomatoes isn't as bad as the last one, but it's the same sort of thing, which is high audience scores, low critic scores. I read one of the critical critic scores because I was curious. And one of the lines is about, because he has a large section on trans people. Some people feel like it's friendly joking. Some people feel like it's attacking. But what this person says is that trans people have no foothold and they have no power, so he's attacking them. And what Dave Chappelle in the special kind of sets himself up is like, black people have no power. And I just noticed that there is this race in modern society, and I think probably for a long time, to be weak. Like to portray oneself as beleaguered. I
wonder if that's not a Christian ethic, because
this is what Nietzsche said, by the way.
Yeah.
Have you read that?
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Is I bet in the Romans time period that there wasn't a race to be weak because
there was no protection for the weak.
Strong.
There was no protection.
Exactly. So if people don't know, the quick version is that a theory is that Christianity came out of being an antithesis to the Roman philosophy. Romans were about strength and power, and obviously a lot of people in the empire weren't doing well, so that ethos did not appeal to them. So Christianity came out of those people needing a religion for them, for the meek shall inherit the earth, and they're, a wealthy man has the same amount of chance of getting into heaven as a camel going through the eye of a needle. All that came from being the opposite of the Roman mythology, basically. So I think in ancient Rome, probably there was not a race to be weak, because being weak just meant you sucked and the gods did not love you and you were not going to do well in this life or the next. But I think potentially because we, as much as we try to deny it, are a largely Christian-based country, that even for atheists, that thought process and belief system gets in there. That is, that the weak are to be listened to and protected and valued and almost over-protected and over-listened to because they are weak. And if we don't listen to them, they can't do it themselves. Whereas the powerful can be ignored and fought against because they're powerful. They're going to get their way anyway.
Well, yeah, there's this, there's whatever the ethic is. It's like with weakness comes power. With being able to claim that someone has been mean to you puts you in a position of power over them, because now you get to return that and they can't do or say or...
Which wasn't always the case. When I was growing up, saying that a bully was mean to you just got other kids to bully you because you were too weak to protect yourself.
Yeah.
So I think that's even in a Christian country, it seems like it's becoming more and more that a kid on a schoolyard could possibly use the fact that they were being bullied as a position of power is mind-boggling. And I think it does happen today. I think you say, this person's bullying me and they're calling me gay, and then people will come to your aid, like even your peers. You don't even need to get a teacher necessarily. That would never, ever have happened when I was growing up.
Yeah. Well, and obviously, like, look, both ethics are screwy. Like, oh, I'm strong, therefore I get to do whatever I want is dumb. And oh, I'm weak, therefore I get to pay you back and you can't. Like, that's dumb. What it ought to be is a separate measurement of right.
Yeah. If anybody, no matter how strong or weak they are, does this thing, is it a thing we want people to be punished for, rewarded for?
Yes. And I enjoyed the special. I actually laughed a bunch, but some of the jokes for me, like, didn't feel grounded enough in truth, and his take on it wasn't sarcastic enough for me to find it funny, because he was talking about, like, if he gets in an argument with a gay person, how is the cops going to react to him as a black man? And I was like, you have $50 million, you're Dave Chappelle. Like, what are you talking about? And it wasn't said sarcastically. And so I was like, I can't connect with the basis of this joke because the cop's going to ask for your autograph. I can't get into this at this.
Yeah, I think his childhood has deeply affected him, and I don't think he's updated necessarily for his wealth and fame.
His personal position of no cop's going to fuck with you, man. When was the last time a cop fucked with you? Like, there was just parts where I was just confused as I watched this. I was like, I don't know how you crafted this scenario. And didn't frame it as something that was just totally silly absurd, in which case I could have got on board and laughed along with it. But yeah, just that ethic of, again, it's not that we need to return to the ethic of strong is better. It's that we want to return to an ethic of, like, hey, let's forget who's strong. Let's forget who's weak. Let's have independent criteria for judging how we resolve our differences, independent of who is weak and strong. And I think that actually is how a lot of people, it's the shortcut. And I realized I did it back in the day. So, like, without knowing a ton about Israel or Palestine, I still don't. As a college student, I sided with Palestine because the Palestinians were the smaller of the two and Israel was stronger. And I didn't know anything about it. And also that was the social thing to do. Today, I don't have an opinion on it because I go, okay, Israel's got more than Palestine, the other thing. But also, interestingly, at the time, the counter to what I was saying was not, no, that's not true for XYZ reasons. It's actually Israel's weak because all of the other nations around them add up together to be stronger. And it's like, no one is talking about, or very few people were talking about right, wrong, that sort of thing. And I guess it's a heuristic that people have learned implicitly to use, which is find whoever in some interaction lacks strength and assume that they need protecting advantage and are justified in their action.
Well, I think Israel and Palestine gets people confused for two reasons. One is it's been happening for a very long time and no one knows all of the events. And so depending on where you draw the line, you say, let's start keeping track of what happened from this year. Oh my God. Well, the first horrible thing that happened was done by Palestine. Well, let's do it by this year. Well, the first horrible thing that happened was done by Israel. And so they don't actually know enough to even know what precipitated the thing that they didn't like. And my understanding is that both parties have done some shitty things. And then the other thing that's happening that makes it difficult is Palestine isn't necessarily a united thing. And so maybe you're negotiating something with one group and another group does something. And it kind of fucks up what you're trying to work towards, which is peace. And some people want a two-party state and some people don't. They want to push Israel to the ocean. And I'm sure in Israel, some people want a two-party state and some people say, no, fuck all these people. And so you have multiple parties representing it. And so you go, well, what is, like when you're saying I'm pro-Palestine, like, well, you're probably not pro-Hamas. So what do you mean when you say Palestine? You're pro the Palestinian people being safe and having a place to live. I think everybody is pro that. And if you say you're pro-Israel, you're probably not pro every single thing they've done. And so, yeah, that issue is just one where no one seems to really know all the details, but has a strong opinion anyway, because of some small portion of knowledge that they have.
Yeah. Well, and I think, unfortunately, that it seems that some disagreements in the world, politics, et cetera, are like semantic. And it's like, oh, actually, there's enough for everybody. And it seems like this particular one is like, no, I want that spot, and I want that spot, and I don't want another spot. Like, it seems that there is a limited resource that both, if you could view them as two parties, even though you point out that they're not just two parties, want exclusive or primary access.
They're also constantly making agreements and then changing their minds. Like the idea that they haven't drawn a line that the most powerful party for each country has agreed and shook hands and signed a treaty and said, here's the line.
Yeah. And
then one of them comes back and wants to push it one direction or the other. Like, that is what's happening. So it's not that they don't ever chunk it up. It's that they change their minds on what is a fair amount for them to have.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the same problem that you pointed out before, which is like, maybe that one guy who made the agreement was cool with it forever, but he doesn't represent everyone. And like, and things.
Well, they don't have a centralized government in the way, like, and I think this is the tough part with the amorphousness of Palestine. Like, Canada isn't trying to take parts of Michigan because there's just this long-standing imaginary line that we have. And because there's one U.S. government and one Canadian government. But it is akin to that. It's akin to drawing the line and saying, hey, we actually want a little bit of what's happening up in Canada. So just give us a little bit more. But that conversation never happens because it's considered absurd for us because the lines existed for so long and there's only two governing bodies interacting. But even when the people in the Palestinian government try to do something, there's just other factions in Palestine that don't agree with it. Freedom fighters or terrorists, depending on who what side of the aisle you're on. But yeah, it makes it really hard to have the line be permanent enough to then set in and just be like any other country where it's considered a war if you try to take more than your imaginary line.
And well, the agreement is tacitly understood between U.S. and Canada on both sides, even though that border was not always fixed. You know what I mean? There was probably a time of skirmishes on either side or people trying to figure out territories or settle in.
Are you saying Los Angeles was not always part of the United States of America?
I was driving. Where were we? Just looking at all of the Spanish named.
I was just at Trancas Park.
Yeah, and I was just like, this is Mexico.
Yeah, sure was.
Yeah. So another random, this government stuff, state government telling private businesses what to do about COVID is no bueno. It's not good in California. It's not good in Texas. And I could imagine a virus that necessitated federal, state level mandates at private business. It's not that I have a hard set principle, which is the government cannot infringe on the private businesses, whatever. Like, I could imagine the bubonic plague and there's a resistance against people dealing with it. We go, okay, we need to do something. But for COVID, I cannot, I guess, believe, is that the right word?
You should believe in COVID.
No. I'm stunned and shocked that mandating that public officials do something or don't do something, and mandating that this occur at a certain time and in public schools, but to go into a private business, a private gym, and say, you have to check people's vaccines or you cannot check people's vaccines, is like, who wants their government making that choice, not knowing which side they're going to land on?
So I think that's interesting because, and I don't disagree, but there's a piece of news that I had found that I was going to bring up that is kind of contradictory to that. I'm curious how you square the two. France is banning plastic packaging for most fruits and vegetables. So you cannot individually wrap an apple anymore. You can't like pre-slice an orange and then put it in a plastic package with a plastic seal and type inside of a cardboard box. I think that's great. I like the idea of it. We've talked before about how often people will claim that they want something like higher pay for Amazon workers, but then don't boycott Amazon. And sometimes the answer is actually just to have the government demand Amazon pay its workers more and have prices increase and people stomach the increase.
So you're saying raise the minimum wage, basically?
Yeah, for the I'm saying that people, I don't know anything about it to know actually how I feel about it, but that there's a lot of people who claim that Amazon's workers are mistreated and underpaid.
And if you raise the minimum wage,
they want those people to make more money, but not enough to stop shopping at Amazon to force it with their behavior. Mm-hmm. But if the government were to intervene and make them pay higher prices because it would get passed through to them, they would think it was a good thing net, even though they were paying more.
But if there was another company that didn't have that rule, they would start shopping there. So the government has to raise that on everybody evenly because people individually will just flow towards the cheapest product that gets delivered the fastest with the hardest worked workers.
In the same way, I would say, let's say that French people, when you survey them, say they want plastics
gone.
Not to be in, like they don't want to take a fruit like an apple that is already self-contained or an orange that's already self-contained, have it chopped up and then put into a plastic cup into a cardboard box. They don't like it, but they buy it for their kids because it's easy and they're just not thoughtful or necessarily even moral in their day-to-day. But when the law passes, they approve of the law. Mm-hmm. So there seems to be times where people support the government telling private businesses what to do. This is the same way we got rid of child labor in the US. That is the government telling companies what they can't do, because otherwise people clearly will still buy Nike. They actually don't stop buying things even though they don't like child labor. So I'm curious, COVID is obviously a distinct and polarizing issue, but when is it okay for a government to tell a private business what to do? Because sometimes we think it's great.
Yeah.
And when is it inappropriate?
Yeah, I don't know. And it's worth thinking about. Do I have principles of like, okay, 50% of the population is in danger up to a degree that could take 7 to 10 years off their life on average?
Let's say child labor. No children will die. I guarantee you, no children will die.
Yeah.
But we're going to let anyone who's over 5 work if their parents will volunteer them and they're willing to, and they do not get a minimum wage because they're under 18.
Yeah.
Do we want that law in the U.S.?
Well, I am not a libertarian in the sense that like my goal is not for the smallest government possible, let people do what's possible, exactly for these reasons.
Right. So what I'm saying is interesting is COVID is so divisive, but we don't uniformly believe that government shouldn't tell private businesses what to do. We actually like sometimes when the government forces their ethics on corporations.
Yeah, this is the art of government. I think this is the hard part, is that I don't know that I could draw an effective scientific line on where government ought to and where they oughtn't get involved. And I actually think as culture changes, that line needs to move, because I don't think that the government in Rome or the 1700s should have said no child under the age of 16 or something can work. I think, you know what I mean? So like that needs to develop over time. And if we were in a world where we had cured death basically of every other cause and COVID existed, I might be for vaccine passports being mandated, but that's just not the world we live in. People die all the time of 100 different things and we don't check their vaccines at these private sorts of... So my comment that we shouldn't mandate or block checking passports, vaccine passports in private businesses is relative to our current culture and our current, rate of death as other things. It's a very particular claim. So how do I come to that? I mean, I don't want them checking for my flu vaccine. I suppose I would want them checking for the bubonic plague vaccine. And COVID, to me, given my understanding of the deaths and how it affects people and the ability to mitigate risk with masks and the fact that you can have a vaccine if you so choose and be in a private business or not go out if you are threatened by it, makes it fall on the other line. And I don't know that I can come up with broad reasons, but I can't draw that line for you perfectly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that is informed by the weird thing is we can't agree on how big a deal COVID is. And that belief is informed by your belief about how big a deal COVID is. But certainly if you were one of the people that thought that this was a microchip designed to make you infertile so that we could control overpopulation, you would be absolutely adamant that the government do what Texas is doing. And if you thought that this was the leading cause of death in the U.S. and will continue to be for years,
actually, even if I thought it was a microchip, I don't think I'd want I still think people in private businesses can check for microchips.
It's not checking, just to be clear. It's mandating. They're saying that you can't Texas didn't say you can't.
Oh,
check.
no. Like if I have a gym and I'm a gym owner and I want everyone who comes into my gym to have a government injected chip.
What Texas said was you cannot require your employees to get the vaccine.
Oh, it's employees. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. I was even thinking.
No, what they
is
said
it not towards, well, correct me if I'm wrong. I might have misunderstood this. Is it not for patrons as well?
I mean, maybe they're
passing
multiple
for patrons.
things.
I thought it was for patrons.
No, so the government said.
I might have misunderstood.
The federal government said, maybe I got it wrong. The federal government said that we are going to demand that people that work at federal agencies have vaccines.
Correct.
And the Texas government said no. And they tried to pass a state law that would make it so that people didn't have to get the vaccine to keep their job.
And for private businesses as well.
Yes, that you can't mandate your employees get vaccinated.
Yes. I'm not sure that
they're saying it is illegal to demand that your employees get a vaccine or else be fired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the employment thing adds another wrench into it because obviously selecting where to work out, where to eat food is one level of inconvenience and disruption to one's life, and getting a new job is at a different level. So I'd have to think personally about how that. I
could be wrong. That's the one I saw at least.
Mm-hmm. But you had said something that I wanted to respond to. I can't remember, unfortunately. It was to your earlier point about how we can't agree on how serious it is. This is because no one is doing, or very few. No, this is the human brain. It's not. We don't do statistics. We do. How frequent do I hear anecdotes? And when the news becomes, someone that is close to you that watches a ton of news and is convinced that essentially the only thing that kills people is COVID, and has never expressed the sort of reluctance to engage in semi-risky activity. But when it comes to COVID, masks, vaccines, can't go to public places, can't do anything, that is totally out of proportion with the risk that they'd be willing to take in terms of like eating red meat.
I know people who will, even though they're vaccinated and everyone going is also vaccinated, won't go in a room with someone if they've been to a event that demanded a vaccine card. So just to make that, so like I go to a conference, everyone there's vaccinated, but there's a lot of people there. And then I go to hang out with this person. They'll say no, even though I'm vaccinated, they're vaccinated. Everyone I was with is vaccinated because of the potential for a Delta variant. If we went to dinner and I had 3 drinks over the course of 2 hours and then offered to drive, like I drove there and then was driving back, they wouldn't get an Uber. They'd just get in my car while I was 3 drinks in.
Yeah.
So yes, that just to illustrate the point, like it's not that they're making sure that their chance of death is 0 for everything.
Yes.
But they want to make sure there's a 0% chance they die of COVID. But they'll die in a drunk driving accident with me if I'm 4 drinks in.
Yeah.
Which I don't do, by the way. Yeah. Because I don't drink and drive.
That's the other problem, is that what we're not acknowledging collectively is that we're not reducing the risk of death. We're not doing this. We're reacting to very particular stimuli on our squawk boxes and forming broad opinions about the world based on that.
Sure. And also
then screaming at each other.
A ton of people have died from COVID, though. I think there are people who, I mean, to your point, sure, it's an anecdote, but like, there's people who have lost multiple loved ones to COVID. And I think it's a very, very, very big deal. And it's very important that people treat it as such.
And then the question is, obviously, it goes without saying that people within the context of their own lives, we want to be able to make as many decisions without government interference as possible. Now, when does the government interfere? And to me, it's not for a disease with this death rate, with this risk rate. That's not where I draw the line. And if other people do, I'd prefer that be the conversation, and that we could then look at comps, meaning we could then be like, okay, like if COVID is this dangerous and you're this concerned and the flu is 1/10 as dangerous or whatever, like, can we take 1/10 of those measures for the flu? Well, why not? You know what I mean? All right. If you know what I mean, and start to form some principled decision-making based on risk of death and not just reacting to one thing that you are frequently told is dangerous. But so yeah, for this particular case, COVID in the world that we live in, I don't think that state government should be telling private businesses that they must screen for vaccines, nor that they can't screen for vaccines.
Just a quick one on conviction for COVID. You see Kyrie Irving?
Oh, wow. Let's see if a lot of talk, but let's see. He might have it. He might have the conviction.
Yeah, just in terms of who thinks COVID's a really big deal, as of now, Kyrie Irving is not playing for his team.
Which is a championship team.
it's a champion team, but also if he doesn't play this year, he foregoes $20 million. But beyond that, he was up for an extension, which I didn't realize, $180 million, which he may not get now, which means even if he does come back and play halfway through the season, he just might not have that guaranteed $200 million, which is even for someone that wealthy, an incredible show of conviction, which is to say, I don't probably agree with anything that Kyrie Irving believes, but he clearly actually believes it very, very strongly. And it's an interesting look into how much people do not want to get this vaccine. Because even when I was like, I'm not going to get it, I'm not going to get it because I think there's a small chance that it's not going to be good for me. I'm not going to react well. And there's a small chance that COVID won't be good. And mostly for me, and based on my demographic, I'm going to be fine if I get the vaccine or get COVID.
Yeah.
And so that was my thought. His is clearly getting the COVID vaccine is awful. That's what he thinks, because he's at the moment, he seems poised to forego $200 million just to avoid getting it.
Yeah, that's wild. I read a comment. I don't know enough about sports entertainment or what it says about Kyrie or who Kyrie is as a person, but it was just that this guy really wants to be a martyr. Do you find that at all true about his past behavior as it relates to this? Because you're saying it's incredible conviction, and I totally agree. But he seems more willing to step up to these like, I'll be Spartacus type moments than other people.
No one really knows what Kyrie thinks about the vaccine because he hasn't spoken it outright.
Yeah.
And so for a while, he didn't say anything, but he would like Facebook posts that talked about how the vaccine was actually a microchip that was being controlled by the Illuminati in order to set black people up for a satanic ritual. And he's just liking a bunch of Instagram posts that said that. So it's like, is this what Kyrie believes? Is he being sarcastic? Who knows? His PR agency has now come out and said the reason he's doing it isn't because he's worried about the vaccine. It's because he wants to stand with other people who are losing their jobs because of vaccine mandates. And he wants to be a voice for the voiceless. If you're going to be a voice for the voiceless, you have to speak. And he has said nothing. He's literally speaking through his agent for that press release. So Kyrie actually hasn't really made it clear why he's doing this. Just that he has a lot of
conviction
around it. Yeah. I mean, I don't think he's doing it well. If you want to be a voice for the voiceless, you speak.
Speak more.
So, yeah, I don't know what his beliefs are because he's purposefully, to this point, not stated them overtly. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily buy that PR spin. They think it's just his agent trying to come out and do damage control.
Explain what seems like maybe is not a very consistent.
Yeah, he also we've also talked about this before. There are people who are prone to conspiracy. There's certain people who believe quote unquote consensus, except for in one regard. They think 9/11 was an inside job, but they don't think that AIDS was created by the government. And they don't think that the earth is flat. And then there's other people who think it all. And Kyrie was a flat earther. I don't know if he still is or not. So I think he has a propensity to believe in conspiracy. My guess is he has a propensity to doubt and dislike authority. So, who knows? He's very interesting.
And of course, the truth has, authority is a heuristic that has nothing to do with the veracity of something. It's a shortcut to trying to figure out truth. It is not.
Yeah, authority can lie to you and it can tell you the truth.
We all use it, but it's not the best.
He's a stark contrast to Ben Simmons, who said he was going to hold out all year and forego millions of dollars. And then literally one paycheck got withheld and he showed right back up. He said, wait a second. You guys are actually going to keep my money if I don't work? I thought that was a bluff.
Yeah.
And just literally showed up right away before the preseason even ended. So they're two stark contrasts in conviction between Kyrie and Ben Simmons. So
yeah, I don't know enough about it. I'm sure that there's another person that could have an interesting conversation, but I don't know anything about it. I have one more random thing. This grinded my gears. So YouTube has this thing, and they've had it, where you can optionally give them your demographic information. What they say, this is in quotes, so I believe I got it exactly. The information you provide will not be used to impact an individual content's performance in YouTube systems. We want to ensure our systems do not reflect unintentional bias. The data from creator demographics will be used to evaluate parts of YouTube, such as our search, discovery, and monetization systems. If we do find errors that affect certain communities, we'll focus on improving the training of our systems to make them more accurate and inclusive. And that's just ridiculous. It like like this isn't going to affect you, but we're going to change things based on the results that you give. It's just like what a double speak nonsense.
Listen, this isn't going to affect you. We're just going to look into some stuff and then make it harder for white people videos to get viewed. So we need to know your race.
Well, here's the
but
thing.
It's not going to affect you. We just want to know your race so that we can see if you're white.
Yes. So, and it's so obvious what's going to happen if the changes that are made. Like, first off, why is the demographic data, and I'll say this 100 times, that they want race, gender, sexual orientation, and then maybe disability? Like, why not income or veteran status, or if you had an abusive parent, or like, there's a lot of people who have been marginalized in the world for a lot of different things.
How many of your parents were drug addicts?
Yeah. There's a ton of things that you could, are you an ex-addict? All of these kinds of things could be used to... You could check on them, but the only ones that we care about constantly are these ones where we have lots of people in position of privilege that check all of the boxes, and a lot of people outside of actual privilege that don't check any of these boxes. And to be clear, I check all of the, like, I have the demographics for that YouTube is about to discriminate against, but I also am in a position of privilege mostly because lucky draw with genetics and family, like, and year born. Like those are, as far as I can tell, the biggest advantages that I've had by far. And people that didn't get those three, but still, are white straight males, are in a way worse spot than many other people. And then also, like, how are you going to determine whether it's inclusive? Is it the number of creators compared to the population, the number of creators on the platform relative to the number of videos made? Like, it's just absurd. And I am getting tired of this ridiculous, this poor reasoning, I suppose, this ideological, and I hate using that word because it's used as a cudgel so many times. And if anyone disagreed with me, I would be happy to explain why, but I've done it many times before on the podcast. It's just, I don't want to rephrase these arguments, so I'm sorry to resort to insults. This is not good. This is literally, and what will they do if whatever the metric that they set is like, we're going to check, to make sure that it's this. What if black women are overrepresented?
Keep it.
Will we keep it or will we adjust so that, yeah, exactly.
I would bet all of my money.
150%. So we're only interested in adjusting one way, but it's like, what if it reflects unintentional bias in a way that you want? So there's intentional bias if you're unwilling to change it in a certain direction.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man.
Just to be clear, though, no one from YouTube would even deny that. They would just look you right in the face and go, "Yeah."
And then what they say is this is based on history. And again, we could have the whole conversation about history because it's not based on history. Again, I don't want to have an argument with a ghost straw man in my head. I would love for someone who believed this to come on the podcast and talk to me about it. But man, I read this and it sucks. I think I've mentioned it, but totally fine. I'm going to be okay. The first times in my life, and this is, I totally get it, very lucky because I want to make clear. I think that there are positions of privilege that are related to race. Like it's to not experience racism is a lucky thing for people. And I mostly haven't in my life. I have recently. I have been denied speaking positions explicitly and implicitly based on gender and race. And it's happened a couple of times in the last several months. And it's totally fine. I'm okay. Don't need to do anything. But I don't think that this is an appropriate solution to
it's not slowing down, dude. It's speeding up.
Oh, it's certainly speeding up.
You're never going to speak again. I just want to clarify.
No, I'll speak.
Your cis white ass is never going to speak again.
I'll speak as much. No, that's not true. And let's not get, I know that you're just joking, but like, I'll be allowed to have this podcast, and I'll be allowed to, maybe with some ding from the algorithm once they start taking that into account. Like I'm not, and luckily I am successful. I will be successful in both personal and monetary terms. I've made it through. What I'm concerned about, for instance, is the guy that I told you about in the last week's podcast. Gruber, come here. Is he bothering you, Justin? My dog is like spinning. Come here, guy.
I pet him and now he wants
come here.
a little taste.
Show them who you are, boy. This is who he is. He's a real troublemaker. I don't need to elaborate too much more. But it's a real bummer, and I wish it would stop, and I don't think it's good. And one of the reasons that, not that I made the podcast, but that things that I want to say on the podcast is just to raise my hand and say that I don't think that this is okay or good, and here's the reasons why. And so if you disagree, I will tell you more of the reasons why in other podcasts. Let us know. But it's no bueno. That is my stand. That is my hot take. No bueno.
Yeah, wow. Riveting stuff. I got one more thing, which I just thought was interesting. California passed a law that makes it a civil sexual battery offense for someone to engage in stealthing. You know what stealthing is?
No.
Removing a condom during sex without verbal consent from their partner. The state is the first in the country to prohibit the act, and I think that's great. My question is, how do you prove this? So I read it, and everyone was very excited about it. Like, yeah. I was like, yeah, this is great. I'm actually, this is great.
That was my.
Make stealthing a crime. Make stealthing a crime. Yeah, you can't remove you can't say you're going to use a condom, be having sex, then take the condom off sneakily, and have unprotected sex without the person knowing about it and consenting.
Well, I have a couple questions.
So you're going to go to court, and the girl or guy, someone's going to say they removed the condom without telling me, and then the other person's going to go, nah, unless you're texting friends bragging about stealthing, being like, oh, it's so great, I stealthed this person.
Yeah.
How is this ever going to be settled? How would you possibly find someone guilty of this?
Yeah. I don't know. I have the same reaction to you, which is, I think I would actually like that to be the case, that was criminally enforced. But I also want to know, like, and I don't know if this is legal, like, what about poking holes in a condom? Is that, I mean, we know some baby traps.
That I don't know the law, but I think that should be also illegal.
I agree. What about saying that you've been taking your birth control when you know that you haven't?
Well, this is the thing. When you know that you haven't, penalize that. Make that illegal.
Yeah.
But now you go to court and she knowingly stopped taking her birth control, and she goes, I just forgot. It's not a crime to forget. Well, and I agree. It's not a crime.
To be clear, I don't think it should be forgot. I think it should have to be a verbal, like, hey, have you been taking your birth control regularly? And that person says yes. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it should be.
Well, maybe they think yes, but they don't remember that 7 days ago they forgot for 2 days, and that throws off the whole functionality of it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because I think if you miss 2 pills, you're not totally off, but now you're officially off base.
You've hurt your chances.
But if that happened 10 days ago and you ask someone, have you been taking your birth control? They go, yeah, the last 8 days I've been taking. I've been taking it.
So I agree. Enforcement's the issue here, but
philosophically, it's very easy to say what should and shouldn't be the law. This one particular,
it sounds like,
how do you,
as long as nobody's effectively proving this, then I'm actually okay. I'm okay with this. Weirdly, like, the law should be on the books, and it should never work because people can just he said, she said it.
I was just curious when I saw it because I was like, this sounds great.
Unless somebody admits to it, unless somebody's like, oh yeah, I did that.
That's what I'm saying. I think you literally are only looking at wiretapping or sending bragging texts to friends
or social media posts. People are weird, man. People,
yeah, sure. Or you'd have to make a TikTok about how great it was that you stealthed someone. Yeah, at which point that's evidence.
I think you'll get a couple people like that. In fact, you might get more than a couple.
Yeah, I mean, probably not once it's a law, but
I do think, and I hope that it cuts both ways.
I take that back because people actually do TikToks of them doing illegal stuff all the time. It's how they get caught.
I don't know if this is the case, but I will be disturbed by this if it doesn't include poking holes in condoms. Like if it
says either party.
Okay. Remove. Well, how does, I guess, the woman sneakily removes a condom? How would that happen?
I don't know. I mean, to be fair, I've had condoms break and not noticed. So I'm sure potentially if I had been drinking and someone yoinked it and I didn't notice, I might not notice till after maybe.
Sure.
It's not impossible. Listen, flashback to when you were 20 years old and getting really drunk. Mm-hmm. You know?
Maybe. Yeah, it's been a long time. I haven't been drunk like that.
Hopefully you'd notice now.
Okay. Yeah.
Imagine this. You're 34. You've lost all sensation in your penis. So you have no idea what's going on down there.
All right. What do we got? Anything else?
No. I just thought that was an interesting law, and I have no idea how they'll ever prove it.
Yeah, I agree. What we got, Justin?
All right. We got one question.
Wow. I hope it's a good one.
Bringing the heat.
Yep. So I'm in my early 20s and moving into a sales career. While I'm great at prospecting, for example, picking up the phone and calling, I have trouble connecting with prospective clients when initially meeting them. When I'm half the age of the prospective clients, it's really hard for me to connect and be charismatic around them. I don't want to be immediately dismissed because of my age or because I don't have kids. When I'm being viewed or viewing myself as inferior based on age, attractiveness, etc., all my charisma vanishes and I can't interact with people properly unless I'm equal to them and not feeling judged or actually being judged. Is dyeing my hair gray and makeup an option?
No. This is a high school person, they said?
Early 20s.
Early 20s.
So
and did they say what they're in, what particular field?
Sales.
Yeah, but like, do we know beyond that? I'm just curious.
They said picking up the phone and calling.
I just want you to know that this is such a common question, which is hopefully makes you feel well, that I made specific videos on it in Charisma University, because what you're like, when I think that people will dismiss me, I get even worse and precipitate the exact thing that I'm worried about. And, that is probably true, that in cases people are more likely to dismiss someone young, but is absolutely not the case, because there's some killer salespeople in their young 20s that go out there and just crush it. What I talk about in the course, and I think, is that if you view yourself on status hierarchies based on experience and age, you're always going to put yourself at the bottom where you belong in that status hierarchy, and you're always going to feel inferior. You want to switch the way that you view it from experience, age to person. Now, I talked about it mostly in the context of like at a job where you're interacting with people, and what that would mean is in the job is, instead of constantly trying to talk about what's going on with the business, like talk about family, stuff outside of that, stuff where you are both two humans and can relate to one another on a level that is even, as opposed to emphasizing that hierarchical difference in you. So I don't know if those sorts of things are available to you on these calls. I don't know how scripted they are, or if it's account management, or if you're...
I thought they said they do well on calls, but not in person.
Is that what it is? Sorry, I might have missed that.
They said it's just hard to connect with people that are older than them, or I guess different than them. Yes,
so this is the thing. I just had dinner last night with the landlords, who, one, have a lot more freaking money than me. They own the home that I'm renting, are much older. Talk to people about people things. So what are the people things? What they love to do, what they hate to do. I found out that he's really afraid of snakes, family, and those sorts of things. This is an interesting one. Their granddaughter is working at Amazon on The Legend of Vox Machina.
Oh, wow.
And dude, my jaw dropped. I was like, oh! I freaked out. She was going to come, but couldn't make it out to the dinner. I was like, she should come. She should definitely come.
Tragic.
She should come. That's a Critical Role thing for those of you who aren't. It's a D&D thing. But yeah, we didn't talk about people things. That can be the local sports team. That can be whatever things that you love, values, all those sorts of things will connect you. And then when you get to the business stuff, you've established that that's not the only active hierarchy, that there's this human thing that you guys are already connecting. And you might have even demonstrated an area where like, they're like, I don't get any of this tech stuff. And you're like, I actually was just setting this up for my family the other day. And you show that yes, there's hierarchies where you're behind, but there's potentially others where you're far ahead. And this is actually what men do with sports, is like, in the office, the lowest analyst, if he watches enough Sports Center, can be like, well, actually the fifth best center is blah, 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 whenever they're talking about who the GOAT is or whatever.
This is also why a lot of people often hire college athletes.
Yeah.
It's because that person is very low on the totem pole, except in the sport that people like. Like, I worked with a guy who was on the golf team, and people talked about golf, and he was a better golfer than all them. So when we talk about work stuff, sure, me and him are the lowest. But if golf comes up and they're talking about golf, or they go golfing together, he's
the pro
at the top.
Yeah.
And then he's giving them advice on their swing.
Mm-hmm. So connect. If you open up that person level, don't make it all about work. There's going to be areas where you're the same, which is human to human, but there might even be levels like golf where they're interested in learning from you, and that can change that sales dynamic a lot.
Yeah, and it's not true of everyone, but there are often areas where the people who are older do envy people who are younger in some areas, and will be interested to hear about your social life or the sports you can play that they can no longer play, or whatever it might be, or just something that they miss from being your age, which they'll be very interested to hear about from you. So I think it's very important to ask them about their life, figure out what's important to them, and anytime you get someone talking about something they're excited to talk about, that's going to go well for your connection. People just love to talk about the things they like to talk about.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, if you can suss out what it is about your life that they want to hear about, people also like listening about topics that they are interested in. And so that's really what it comes down to, is in terms of the connecting part, shared values and getting them enjoying the conversation by having them talking about and listening to stuff that they're excited to talk about and listen to.
Yeah, and concretely, the co-owner of the consulting business that I worked at, who wound up giving me like the 80% raise, the remote work arrangement. He was older than me, but he would get this like wistful look in his eye when I would talk about my weekend. He'd be like, "Where'd you go?" Yeah. I'd be like, "I went to Midtown." I was like, "I remember Midtown." And we used to, and so that was, a little bit of vicarious glory day stuff going on there. Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. All right, we're going to hop over to Patreon now. Hope that you guys enjoyed this. If you want to see more, what do we have, Justin?
We've got questions about practicing observational humor, about nailing conversations with the higher-ups at work, and then how to stop sacrificing yourself for others' happiness.
Awesome. So that and much more, if you guys want to see it, it's on Patreon. Any level gets you access, helps us keep the podcast going, keep money in Justin's bank account. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this. We'll see everyone else on Patreon. Peace.